So, hello, Dianne Morales. Thank you for joining us today. Really excited to hear you speak and hear what your thoughts are on Closing Rikers. My name is Kandra Clark. I'm one of the vice presidents with Exodus Transitional Community. We're a preventative reentry and advocacy organization, and I'm directly impacted by incarceration. My first arrest was at 15. I've been in and out of jails all across the United States, both rural and urban. And I spent about 4 months on Rikers, the Rose M. Singer Center, before going to upstate prison. So I've been on the campaign to close Rikers since 2015, and I've got to do a lot of really amazing work, even tour Norway and Amsterdam to pull in some principles that they use from Europe. Yeah, so really excited to have you with us today, and I'm going to dive right into our first question. Do you support closing Rikers Island and the boat by or before August 31st, 2027, and reducing total citywide jail capacity to 3,300 or less by that time?
Is this a yes or no question? Because it's a yes. Do you want me? You want me to elaborate on that, or just say yes?
You can elaborate if you want, or if it's just a yes or no, you can say yes or no. But if you want to elaborate a little bit, that's great.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I'm a strong proponent of closing Rikers. I believe we need to move away from a system that overly criminalizes people, some people more than others, and to really actually adopt things in our society that are healing and transformative in terms of making it possible, increasing the possibilities for everyone to live healthily and with dignity in our city.
And how would you address dangerous and dehumanizing conditions on Rikers Island and in the existing borough jails right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think the prioritization needs to be actually on providing, making sure that we are decreasing the number of people that are being incarcerated in our city, and making sure that we are prioritizing funding and supporting folks on the front end so that we are precluding people from, entering into the system to begin with. I believe we need to move also towards just decarcerating our city and, our jails. And that means, not just, focusing on the front end, but also getting as many people out as possible. And also, really focusing on creating community-based supports so that we can support the people that are incarcerated while they're in there. That also means, reassessing bail, like I mentioned before, so that we're dramatically reducing the population that's in there now, as well as the folks that are in the pipeline or that end up being in the pipeline. And really making sure that, for example, that we're doing what we can to address the actual physical conditions in the space now, so that folks are able to have some dignity while they're there as well.
And I'm going to skip around a little bit just because you mentioned the decarceration piece, which is so important to us, right? I think, starting the campaign, we have 14 jails, 10 on the island, 4 in the boroughs right now. We really want to reduce that all the way down to the 4 borough-based facilities, the 3,300 or less. So during the peak of the pandemic, Rikers held about 3,800 individuals, thanks to all the citywide efforts to rapidly decarcerate. Unfortunately, today, that population has risen back up to 5,600. Right. So how will you, as mayor of New York City, reduce the average daily jail population during your first year in office?
Right. Well, I think that means we need to, again, move towards the decriminalization of minor offenses. We need to move away from criminalizing right now the way we do mental illness and trauma, addiction, homelessness. I mean, we've got, in essence, right now, our jail system is sort of a massive mental health hospital. There's so many folks who are incarcerated as a result of other issues and other challenges that we need to address and need to prioritize in terms of providing supports and interventions for those folks as well. And also, dealing with the bail system and making sure that folks are not in there who, as a result of bail or lacking funds or lacking advocates to support them. And really kind of, prioritizing how we're investing in the things that we know keep people safe, not things that cause further trauma and harm. I'm a big proponent of community safety work, and that means including things like community health, access to housing, access to jobs. We just need to fundamentally transform our orientation on our framework right now and move away from criminalization and incarceration of things like poverty and, walking well Black and brown.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in addition to that, one of the more difficult challenges that we experience, right, when we're looking to decarcerate is some of the folks who have a mental health issue, but their charge might have been a very violent charge. So
Right.
How would you support decarcerating those folks? Like, what are some tools that you would use or invest in?
Yeah, so, I was the first candidate to call for defunding the police. I've called for defunding by $3 billion. It's a start. And part of what I talk about when I talk about that is divesting and reinvesting, right? We've got to recognize right now we have a sort of one size fits all response to everything that happens in our city, right? Whether it's somebody having a mental health crisis or somebody who's struggling with homelessness or somebody who's like, stab someone else. Like our responses are all the same. It's call the police. Our responses should be tailored and specific to the crisis at hand so that we're providing as much help and support to the person in crisis as possible. So I've called for the creation of a community first responders department as part of this, because we know that a significant part of the number of the calls that the police are responding to are not crimes in progress. And the other thing I like to think that pops into my head whenever I say this is police don't actually prevent crime. They respond to whatever these calls are. And so the Community First Responders Department would actually be people who are trained and skilled at intervention and de-escalation, not just on their own, but who are also part of a larger ecosystem of services like mental health providers, housing providers, medical care, so that once they actually sort of, intervene in the immediate crisis, they're actually connecting that person to something else, right? So that we can move towards breaking the cycle. Because right now what happens is the police respond, and if we're lucky, that person gets locked up overnight and released the next day. That's the best case scenario, and it still causes harm. The worst case scenario, that person is physically harmed or killed. And we actually need to respond in a way that prioritizes the well-being and the safety of the person who's in crisis, and have responses that are appropriate to the issue at hand. So that is one of the things that I have called for in terms of the beginnings of an alternative to the way we're addressing things now.
All right. And going along with that as well, the judicial system, you hit on it a little bit. For our folks that have more serious charges, it's much harder for us to advocate and get them released into alternative to incarceration programs. Is that something that you would make a priority as mayor?
Yeah, I think we need to focus on, rather than the criminal legal system that we have, we need to focus on transformative justice and really providing people with the supports that they need to address whatever egregious, grievance or egregious behavior they've engaged in, so that we can help them kind of reintegrate into the community and really give them a pathway to being able to be as productive and constructive and as integrated as possible. I'm a believer that no one aspires to do harm in that way, and that these things are symptoms of other issues that have not been addressed, and that we really need to prioritize finding ways to help people heal, and help people overcome the multiple traumas that our multiple systems impact on people's lives, rather than this sort of punitive thing that does nothing to transform the conditions of that individual's lives, and in fact, I think imposes and inflicts more harm.
Absolutely. And we always say that hurt people and healed people heal people. So, it's very true. Have you done any projections on how low you believe the jail population could be by 2027?
Quite frankly, we are, one of the things I talk about all the time is like, I'm not the hero and I'm not the savior. I'm not projecting myself to be like, the one with all the answers. What I am doing is relying on folks on the ground who've been doing this work and who are the experts to help inform the agenda for City Hall, right? Because the people that are closest to the problems are also closest to the solutions. And so I am not inventing my own things in a silo separate from the folks on the ground who've been doing the advocacy and the activism. I am actually more than willing to adopt and amplify the messages of the community in terms of what people think we need to do. The only thing for me that's non-negotiable is my values. And my values are essentially aligned with the idea that everyone has value and that everyone has the right to live with dignity, care, and solidarity. And those are the three sort of pillars of the platform. So for us right now in the campaign, while this is obviously part of what we refer to as a co-creation, we talk about co-creating strategy and policy with people on the ground. Right now, we are, very much in alignment with the Close Rikers movement, August 31st, 2027, reducing the jail capacity to 3,300, and sort of willing to kind of follow the lead that you all are taking in this fight.
Well, thank you for that. As directly impacted people, we definitely thank you for that. And I want to switch gears just a little bit. Do you support moving forward with the Renewable Rikers plan?
Yeah, I do actually support that plan. I feel like we need to fight both mass incarceration and the climate crisis, and this gives us an opportunity to kind of get a twofer, right? Get people out of the awful conditions of Rikers and actually repurpose that facility so that we're actually doing some good for New Yorkers. So I think that's a good idea.
And in supporting it, how would you ensure the transfer of land from DOC to the Department of Citywide Administrative Services as quickly as possible as jails are emptied?
How would I support the transfer of land? I mean, the sort of quick and dirty answer to that is, as mayor, you get to sort of expedite that and make sure that that's happening and make sure that it's happening in a fair and just way, and in a timely way. I think that one of the things that I think about that comes up a lot with sort of the idea of, my positions and taking on the criminal legal system and the entrenched unions and the entrenched, workers' interests and all of that stuff is I get to be a little bit unapologetic and unabashed because my loyalty is to the people and the folks that have made my campaign possible, my candidacy possible, and would make my administration possible. But the other thing is I have a lot of experience as an executive, as someone who's actually been responsible for like getting ish done. And, I sort of know how to do that. I know how to actually even navigate situations where there are opponents or people that are opposed to what it is that you're trying to do, and to just get it done, while bringing along as many people as you can bring along, but also recognizing that you're never going to get 100% agreement and you've got to figure out how to navigate those people too.
Yeah. So last year, the number of women, trans, and gender non-conforming individuals on Rikers Island was less than 180 for several months. Today, again, unfortunately, that number's rose back up. It's 275. How will your administration continue to significantly reduce the number of women in detention?
Yeah. So this speaks to the larger systemic issues, right? About the disproportionate way that women and transgender women are policed and criminalized. And so, we need to start with decriminalizing the things that are, giving police an excuse to arrest our women, right? Whether that's sex work or, whatever other issues are disproportionately impacting our women. I think that's a critical piece, right? And then also making sure that folks have the legal access to the legal representation and the education that they need, and the advocacy on the front end before incarceration. The know your rights stuff, I think is critical. And I also think, and I'm literally, there's a little bit of me that's kind of just thinking off the top of my head right now when I think about women and what women need, in terms of having access to advocates, other women who have those experiences, right? Who can actually, I think about impacted communities having a front row seat in being able to support other women who are being impacted, and being able to take the lead in providing those services, providing those interventions, providing that support, and the difference that could make when you see yourself reflected in the people that are supporting you, to me, I think is critical.
And in addition to, my work with Closing Rikers, I'm one of the board members of the Women's Community Justice Association. So we work specifically with the Rose M. Singer Center. Are you committed to closing the Rose M. Singer Center before 2027, since there's only 275 women?
Yeah, I mean, I think that seems to me like what we would consider low-hanging fruit, right? I also know, I mean, this is going to be biased, but women are caretakers, women are problem solvers, women are multitaskers, women are leaders, women are community pillars. We need to support getting these women back to their community and providing them with the help that they need and the resources that they need to re-enter into their communities in a stable, as safe, and as secure a way as possible, so that they can begin their own healing journey, and do what women do, which is just be powerful pillars and contributors to the community and to society, and prioritize them, because we need to just move towards valuing and respecting women for everything that we are and everything that we do.
And I'm really happy you said that. The prioritizing, I think, is the most important, right? And we always talk about it, so you're not biased, because when you incarcerate a woman, you incarcerate the family, you incarcerate the community. Right. That's usually the one that's taking care of the kids. They're holding down the men in their lives. And you see it in the visiting rooms, right? So as an incarcerated woman, you see that we don't have a lot of people that come visit us, because it's always us visiting the men who are inside, right? And it's the grandma taking care of the kids. And so it's definitely important. We always talk about that. I don't think that that's a bias at all.
Yeah. Yeah. And I, quite frankly, as a single mom who is the sandwich generation in a 3-generation household and takes care of my parents and takes care of my children, like, I get it, right? Like, if you remove that block, everything else kind of crumbles. And so we have to make sure that we recognize that and the damage and the harm that it does to our communities when we're incarcerating women. Anybody, but it's different.
Yeah, and the trauma I experienced on Rikers, we talk about the trauma before, during, and after. 90% of the women that are inside are experiencing sexual or physical abuse as children. Like, those correlations, it's a big difference.
Yeah.
I'm going to switch gears just a little bit, because you mentioned this earlier around NYPD, and thank you for kind of giving us some numbers on that. But many candidates have said that they would defund the NYPD. Decarceration advocates have also pointed to bloated operations budgets of other law enforcement agencies, including the district attorney's offices, the Department of Corrections. And the Department of Corrections, for example, employs 8 times more officers per incarcerated person than the national average. So would you reduce the Department of Corrections annual budget? And if yes, by how much and over what period of time?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So yes, we would absolutely move to reduce the DOC's budget. I mean, they've been under federal monitor for years, and they just keep getting worse. And I think if I'm recalling correctly, it's something like, we're spending $1.32 on incarceration versus like $1 on housing in the city. So it just speaks to like how skewed our priorities are. And so we're just actually, to be honest, getting into an analysis of the corrections budget to try to get to the figure that we're going to divest. That's the word that we use, divest. And by when, because we're looking to really prioritize investing in things like housing and education and economic security for folks. and moving away from just the carceral system. So that we also want to make sure actually that we do that in such a way that provides options for a just transition for some of the DOC workers, because I know that a lot of them are women of color. But we also need to find ways to expand the accountability mechanisms, because DOC officers also need to be held accountable. Yes. We need to make sure that there's transparency around their behaviors and an accountability process. So stay tuned on those numbers, because we're doing that deep dive right now. We're finding all kinds of criminal legal money all over the city in all kinds of city agencies, not just those that are explicitly part of the system.
And have you thought any more about that just transition and what that process would look like, or what plans you have for that?
Well, we are, so a couple of different things. There's layers of complexity here, because DOC officers are disproportionately women of color also, which there's a tension there, right, between this system that harms these communities disproportionately and in many instances, the women from these communities that are disproportionately harmed acting in service of this system, right? And so, again, my belief is that many of these women, at least initially, had intentions of trying to find a way of being helpful and being of service. And so I'd like to actually, because we're talking about expanding so broadly, the system and the network of supportive services that's available to community members in terms of housing and other social services and education and counseling and all those kinds of things. I'd like to find a way for some of those women who want to provide support to their communities to be able to have access to those roles, to be able to have access to the training, to make sure that they're ready for those roles, and to be prioritized so that we're not displacing them and causing kind of a negative impact on their families and their communities. We have to make sure that while we move toward transformation and restoration from the criminal legal sense, that we're not causing harm to the very community that it is that we're trying to prioritize and elevate. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Okay. We talk about a just transition all the time, right? There has to be a balance, and we agree the same with what you just said around not displacing in other families, right? Like that's never our intention or goal. But something definitely has to get done, right? There's 9,000 correctional officers. Our daily population is down to 5,200. At a certain point, when COBA, which is the Correction Officers Benevolent Association, the union for Department of Corrections, when their new contract comes up right now, the only plan in place is really around attrition, because, there's a clause that they cannot do layoffs until 2022. So would that be something that you would be willing to further discuss as mayor? I mean, we're never going to reach the number we need to reach through attrition. So I agree with the just transition and getting people out, but at some point, you're going to have to do something different. What would you do when it comes to COBA's new contract?
Yeah, no, I think it needs to be more than just attrition, natural attrition. There needs to be an actual proactive and deliberate restructuring, and the creation of these new jobs that I'm talking about that might be housing related or counseling related or other supportive services related. And the sort of, there needs to be kind of like a date that is set by which, or, progression over time by which these X number of jobs are going to be eliminated, and we're going to create these jobs in this way, and folks will get the opportunity. I think, we're not talking about making guarantees, right? Because we have to make sure that people are the right fit. You can't just change somebody's clothes and expect that they're going to become a different person. So there has to be a process by which people are evaluated, and where we make sure that they've got at least the real sort of intent and the real, shared values, and some basics that then they can be trained to move into other positions. And I would want to give them priority in doing that. But that's not the same as a guarantee, right? That to me is what a just transition is really about, is you're being given a fair and just shot to make this move. But you also have to be able to be willing and able to play your part in doing that.
Absolutely. I know that you believe New York City can and should eliminate all incarceration for people with serious mental health needs. How would you achieve this? I know you hit on it a little bit before, but I want to really delve in a little bit more.
Yeah. The first thing that comes to mind when you ask me that question is care, not criminalization. I've been public about the fact that my daughter struggles with some mental health needs. I mean, is it severe? I mean, it depends on the day. Is it persistent? For sure. And I think that we just need to expand and deepen the sort of options that we have available to community members right now. It's so hard in New York City to access mental health care. It's so hard to access the quality mental health care, sustainable mental health care. So for me, part of that is, first of all, making sure that people have access to the coverage, right? The New York Health Act, mental health care, that everybody, the folks aren't having to worry about, how am I going to pay for this? Can I afford this? That kind of thing. It needs to be universal. But we also need to have a robust menu of options, and they need to be locally available as well. So I've called for the creation of integrated community health clinics on a local level, so that, that are accessible. People can walk to their local clinic, and those clinics will have a whole variety of different services, including medical services and mental health services, group programming, individual programming, peer-led programming, and the idea of being able to access increasingly intensive support, so that those folks who need increasingly intensive support can get that in an integrated way, right? If your therapist is located at the same center where your psychiatrist is located, they're naturally speaking to each other. That care is already starting to become integrated in a different kind of way. We need to move away from this idea of essentially incarcerating the mentally ill. And I don't mean, when I say that, I don't mean just our jails or prisons. I'm also talking about our mental health institutions, which mimic our prisons in so many ways, that are not healing, and are further trauma inducing for so many.
Thank you for that. And I know we're running out of time. I just want to hit maybe two little more quick questions. Okay. Have you ever been detained on Rikers, or have you ever visited a loved one who is detained on Rikers?
I haven't. I haven't been on Rikers. I did work closely with, when I was at the Department of Education, with the academy folks, but no, I haven't been there. I will be there though. I will be there as mayor. That would be something that I would do on a regular basis, particularly as we move towards the closure, to make sure that folks are being taken care of as much as they're incarcerated.
And I suggest when you do it as mayor that you do it unannounced, because you'll get a very different experience if they know you're coming versus if they don't. So try to definitely get as many meetings unannounced as possible.
I've heard that. So it won't be on the public calendar. It'll just happen.
Yes. And maybe two more. The majority of people incarcerated in city jails retain the right to vote. How would you ensure that the Board of Elections and all agency staff uphold these rights and improve access to voting for people in custody?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to do that in a multi-pronged, comprehensive way, right? To make sure that every single person who is incarcerated and is able to vote, that has the right to vote. And so I think that means making sure we've got a polling place set up for them there on the day of, making sure that they have access to mail-in ballots, if that's what they want to do, making sure that they have access to, well, we don't do electronic voting, which is a problem, but we should. But really making sure that we are, treating them as if they were anyone else, right, inside or outside the system, and not that we do that well, quite frankly, with everybody else anyway. There's a lot of room for improvement in voting, but I in particular am very invested in making sure that folks who are impacted and folks who are at Rikers have the access to vote. It is, to me, a critical civil right. and their voices should be heard, particularly given that they're expected to adhere by the legal system and the policies that elected officials implement. So they should have a voice in who those elected officials are, and be able to make sure that they're being represented in the same way that anybody else is, for as long as they're paying tax. People pay taxes, right? It should just be sort of like, that's an automatic. The right to vote should also be an automatic, no matter who you are or where you are.
Yeah. And I think just doing some education too for folks around that, right? We don't want to give them the right to vote or say, here, vote, but then we don't do any of the front end work to like say who's running and what's their platforms and, that whole civic engagement piece.
Yes. I mean, that is critical. It's critical that happen in an objective way, right? Rather than, what happens sometimes now. And also like when we're making changes or when there are other things on the ballot other than just the elections, right? When there's opposition, people need to understand what the implications are. Right now with ranked choice voting, what does it mean to do ranked choice voting, and what does that look like? And the idea that you get to, with ranked choice voting, actually vote with your heart, that you can actually choose someone who you just really, really like, even if, you think it's a long shot. Those things, voter education is a critical part of democracy. And I think it's a critical part. I'm a big proponent of the idea of people claiming space in the electoral democratic process that haven't historically felt seen or heard in that process, because democracy belongs to all of us. And so they need to know what it is that they're doing, what they're choosing, and that it is their right and to exercise that.
And this will be our last question. I'm sorry for running a little bit over. Okay. Local Law 193, which was passed in October of 2019, established a commission to make recommendations on reinvestment in communities most impacted by mass incarceration. At least half of us on the commission are formerly incarcerated. How do you support the work of this commission and implement their recommendations?
Yeah. I think the city does a lot of commissions, and I've been on some of the commissions. First of all, I would say that folks from the impacted communities in particular should be compensated for their work. This is something. It's their experiences are of value, and it shouldn't be something that the city gets for free. The city has a terrible habit of like getting all kinds of things for free from people. And so, I think that the commission needs to be resourced and funded. That starts with stating the impacted people for their work. It also includes the idea of centering and prioritizing your voices in that process, right? It shouldn't just be a symbolic thing where you're sitting on the commission and you say things, but then, the staff does whatever the staff wants to do anyway, which is also an experience that I've had in other commissions, and really making sure that, that even the people that aren't, impacted, that are, doing that work are really true allies, and really truly are invested in the vision behind that. But I think, obviously funding is critical. Funding for the work to happen, funding for, the participants to make sure that you're able to fully participate without having to sacrifice something else. I think that is critical. It's also a way of showing what's priority. I'm a big believer in budgets and how we spend our money being a reflection of our values and priorities. So that would be a critical thing for me.
Yeah, and that's one thing that's really exciting about the commission is we get to go through budgets and really push around reallocations and reinvestments and the whole nine. So we look forward to hopefully having you see our recommendations, and
I look forward to that too.
So that I'll end there. Thank you for taking up so much time. I appreciate you going over. Just really want to thank you again for being here with us today.
Thank you so much. I was happy to be here. It was a pleasure. Thanks for talking to me.